Disclaimer: this story is a fictional emotional drama created purely for entertainment purposes. All characters, names, and events are imaginary and do not depict any real individuals or situations. The intention is to explore complex human emotions and relationships that many might find relatable. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. It had been a while since Emily and I had done anything social together. Life had turned into a routine of quiet dinners, rushed mornings, and long silences at night. So when she told me we were going out to dinner with her friends on Saturday, I felt an unexpected flicker of hope. I thought maybe she was trying. Maybe this would be the night we'd laugh again. We arrived at the trendy little bistro downtown. I had never met her friends before, but she had mentioned them often: Sophie, Rachel, and Kevin. As we stepped inside, the place buzzed with warmth and conversation. Emily walked ahead of me, not waiting or even checking if I was behind her. It stung a little, but I brushed it off. The table was already half full when we got there. Sophie stood up to greet us. She was warm, with kind eyes that lingered just a second longer than expected when she shook my hand. Kevin nodded and Rachel smiled tightly, though I couldn't tell if it was polite or something else. As I sat next to Emily, I tried to place my hand gently on her back. She stiffened and leaned forward, away from my touch, like it was something offensive. My throat tightened a little. I pretended not to notice. The conversation started light: movies, work, mutual friends. I joined in carefully, not wanting to dominate or seem out of place. When I cracked a small joke, Sophie laughed softly. But before I could feel included, Emily turned to the group and said, "He always thinks he's funny. He's not." There was an awkward chuckle around the table. My cheeks burned. I tried again later, commenting on a funny work incident. Before I could finish, Emily interrupted, "You're telling that story again? It wasn't even that interesting the first time." The room went quiet for a second. I could see Kevin glance toward his plate. Rachel sipped her wine. Sophie looked at me, really looked at me. I smiled faintly and nodded, pretending it didn't bother me. But inside, I was shrinking. Dinner had just begun, but I already wanted to leave. The woman I had married, the one who used to hold my hand under tables like this, was now acting like I was an embarrassment she had to endure. I looked at her, wondering how things had gotten this far. Her face was cold, unreadable. And I suddenly had a terrible thought. Maybe this wasn't new. Maybe this was just the first time her friends had witnessed it. The wine kept flowing, and so did the discomfort. I sat quietly, trying to blend into the background of the evening as best I could. But it seemed like every time I spoke, Emily found a way to put me down, like it was a game she was playing, one I had no idea I was a part of. When Kevin mentioned his recent trip to the mountains, I chimed in. "We went hiking last year, same area. It was beautiful." Emily immediately scoffed. "You lasted barely 20 minutes. He was wheezing like an old man halfway through. Laughter bubbled around the table, but it didn't feel real. Sophie didn't laugh. Her eyes flickered between Emily and me, a quiet concern settling in her expression. I forced a smile and laughed along, even though I felt like crawling under the table. A few moments later, Rachel complimented the restaurant's decor, and I added, "It's got a nice, rustic vibe. Reminds me of a cabin we once stayed in during fall." Emily leaned forward with a smirk. "The one you locked us out of because you forgot the key?" "Yeah, very memorable." Even Kevin winced this time. I wasn't angry, just numb. I kept asking myself, why? Why tonight? Why like this? Was I really that embarrassing to her? Between bites, I'd glance at her, hoping she might make eye contact or flash a smile. But she avoided me completely, talking animatedly to her friends while I sat there like an unwanted accessory. At one point, Sophie gently asked me about my work. I told her I worked in publishing, helping edit books for new authors. Before I could finish, Emily chimed in, "Yeah, he reads boring stuff all day and thinks he's Hemingway." Everyone froze for a second. Sophie frowned and replied, "Actually, that sounds like a really interesting job." I looked at Sophie, grateful, surprised. Her voice had just enough sharpness to cut through the tension, but she said it with grace. Emily didn't respond. Instead, she picked up her wine glass and turned away. That small moment of support felt like a lifeline in an ocean of quiet humiliation. As dessert arrived, I noticed Sophie watching me again. Not in a flirty way, but with a kind of silent empathy. It was like she was seeing something others had chosen to ignore. I wasn't being overly sensitive. This was real. And it had been happening for a long time. I had just learned to laugh through the pain. I felt exposed under the soft lights of that restaurant. I wasn't a man enjoying dinner with his wife. I was a man being slowly torn down in front of strangers. And worst of all, I was starting to accept it. By the time dessert was served, I was running out of ways to pretend everything was fine. The quiet humiliations, the sarcastic digs one after another, they weren't just playful jabs anymore. They were deliberate, strategic, public. The laughter at the table had grown more forced. Kevin checked his phone more often. Rachel mostly stirred her drink. Sophie, though, was still watching me closely. Her eyes had a softness to them, a kind of sadness, like she was silently asking, "Are you okay?" But I wasn't. Emily leaned back in her chair, swirling the last sip of her wine, and looked right at Sophie. "You know," she began, her voice loud enough for the table to pause, "I was telling him earlier how lucky he is to have me. I mean, come on. Look at us. Me, polished and elegant. Him, still wearing shoes from, what? 2010. A few weak chuckles. Mostly awkward silence. I looked down at my shoes. They were old, sure, but clean. I'd worn them because I thought Emily liked them. I could feel my ears burning. I was embarrassed, not because of the shoes, but because my wife, my partner, thought it was okay to make a joke out of me like that, in front of everyone. Before I could find words to respond, Sophie stood up abruptly. "Hey," she said, turning toward me. "Let's go outside for a minute." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Why? He's fine. Don't baby him, sophomore." But Sophie ignored her. She looked at me with quiet insistence and tilted her head toward the door. "Just a minute," she said again, softer this time. I didn't know why, but I followed her. Maybe it was the kindness in her voice. Maybe it was the escape. Outside, the air was crisp and cool. The buzz of the city surrounded us, cars passing, laughter from another table on the patio, a dog barking in the distance. We stood in silence for a moment before she finally said, "I'm sorry." I turned to her, confused. "Why are you apologizing?" She looked away, then back at me. "Because I've seen it before. The way she treats you." I didn't say anything, and maybe I should have. But tonight, it crossed a line. I didn't speak. My throat felt tight. Sophie stepped closer. "You didn't deserve that in there. None of it. And you don't have to pretend it doesn't hurt." For the first time in a long time, someone had seen through the smile I wore like armor. Someone had called out what I had been too ashamed to admit. I swallowed hard and looked up at the night sky. "I thought I was going crazy," I whispered. "I thought maybe I was just too sensitive." "You're not," she said. "You're just not being loved the way you should be." And that simple sentence cracked something wide open inside me. We stood there in silence, surrounded by the noise of the city, but somehow wrapped in our own quiet world. Sophie hugged her coat tighter around her shoulders and looked at me, not with pity, but with empathy. Real, raw empathy. "I wasn't planning to say anything," she said, her voice soft but steady. "But I couldn't sit there and let that happen. Not again." I looked down at my hands. They were clenched into fists in my pockets. "Has she done this before?" "In front of you." Sophie nodded slowly. "Yeah, not always this obvious. But the little things, talking over you, making you the punchline, rolling her eyes like you're just some burden. I always noticed it. I guess I just convinced myself it wasn't my place to say anything." That hit harder than I expected. It wasn't just me who noticed. Other people had seen it, too. I hadn't imagined it. I wasn't being dramatic. I let out a long breath. It wasn't always like this. She used to be different. Softer. Warmer. Somewhere along the way, it's like I became her disappointment. Her enemy. Sophie leaned against the wall, folding her arms. People change. But love? Real love doesn't humiliate. It doesn't tear down just to feel taller. I looked over at her, surprised by the fire in her voice. "Did something happen to you?" I asked gently. She gave a sad smile. Yeah, I dated someone for years who made me feel like I was always wrong. Always not enough. It took me a long time to understand that I was worth more than the way I was being treated. I nodded, her words sinking deep. I keep asking myself, I murmured, why I stay. Why I keep showing up to be unloved. Sophie's eyes softened even more. Because you're hoping she'll change. That one day she'll see you again the way she used to. And maybe, deep down, you still believe you don't deserve better. I felt like she had pulled the words straight from my heart. I don't know what to do, I admitted. This marriage, it's so full of silence. Disrespect. But I'm scared of what it means to leave. What it means to be alone. You're already alone, she said gently. I looked at her, and in that moment, I didn't feel judged. I felt seen. Sophie didn't offer false promises or dramatic solutions. She just stood there, letting me speak. Letting me breathe. Thank you, I said quietly. She smiled. You don't owe me thanks. Just stop pretending you're okay when you're not. You deserve more than to shrink in your own life. A gust of wind passed between us, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel cold. We returned to the table a few minutes later. The air inside felt thicker somehow, like everyone had sensed a shift. Emily's eyes met mine, sharp, calculating. She said nothing, just raised her eyebrows and sipped her wine. Her lips curled into a bitter smile as if to say, well, are we done with the drama now? I sat down quietly. Sophie followed, offering a polite smile to the table, but her body language was different, more guarded now. Emily didn't speak to her either. The rest of the evening blurred into quiet discomfort. I barely touched my food. The laughter was forced, the conversations shallow. It was obvious the energy had shifted, and the earlier performances were done. Eventually, we all said our goodbyes. No one lingered. Later that night, after we got home, Emily barely acknowledged me. She walked into the bedroom, took off her earrings, and started removing her makeup like nothing had happened. Are we going to talk about what happened? I asked. What happened? She replied flatly, not even turning around. You insulted me. Over and over. And when your friend tried to help, you acted like I was the problem. She laughed, cold, cruel. You're too sensitive. You always take everything so personally. God, it was just dinner. Just dinner. I stared at her in disbelief. I wanted to scream. Instead, I turned and left the room. A few hours later, as I lay on the couch wide awake, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Sophie. Sophie, I just wanted to say again, I'm sorry. You didn't deserve that tonight. Me? Thank you. That means a lot. Sophie, I don't want to cause trouble, but there's something I need to show you. I debated sending it, but I think you should know. She sent a few screenshots. They were messages. Private group chats between Emily and her friends. Some from weeks ago. Some from months. In them, Emily complained about me endlessly. Mocked my appearance. Made fun of my attempts at intimacy. Called me pathetic, useless, and dead weight. One message read, I only bring him around so they don't think I'm a total ice queen. My chest tightened. The words blurred in my vision. This wasn't just frustration or venting. This was hatred. Cruelty. Betrayal. I stared at the screen in disbelief. I wanted to unsee it, but I couldn't. Everything Sophie had said was real. Everything I had been feeling wasn't in my head. Me, how long have you known about these? Sophie, a while. I distanced myself from them because of it. I thought she'd stop. But tonight, I knew I had to speak up. I sat there in silence, phone trembling in my hand. It wasn't just a bad night. It was the truth finally laid bare. The next morning, I woke up on the couch with my phone still clutched in my hand. My eyes were puffy from lack of sleep. My mind was a storm of anger, betrayal, and disbelief. I couldn't go on pretending. Not anymore. I got up, walked into the kitchen, and found Emily sipping coffee by the window like it was any other morning. She didn't even look at me. We need to talk, I said firmly. She sighed loudly, not even turning around. Again? What now? I placed my phone on the counter and slid it toward her, the screenshots open and visible. This, I said. Let's talk about this. She glanced at the phone and then looked away, pretending not to care. Where did you get that? Sophie, I said. She showed me everything. The messages. The names. The things you said about me, about our marriage. Emily finally turned, her expression unreadable. I didn't mean half of it, she said coldly. People vent. That's what private chats are for. Vent. I repeated, my voice shaking. You called me pathetic. Dead weight. A joke. Is that how you really feel about me? She crossed her arms, eyes narrowing. What difference does it make now? You've been walking around this house like a sad little puppy for years. Always needing attention. I got tired of pretending. I stared at her, stunned. Pretending to love me? She shrugged. I don't know. Maybe. Maybe I was just scared of being alone. But being with you, it started to feel like being stuck. Her words cut deeper than anything she had ever said in front of others. They weren't sarcastic anymore. They were sharp, deliberate truths. And what about last night? I asked. Did you enjoy humiliating me in front of your friends? I didn't think you'd be so dramatic about it, she said. But if Sophie's feeding your ego now, maybe you should go cry to her instead. That did it. I stepped back, tears threatening to fall, not out of weakness, but from the sheer weight of clarity. I'm done, Emily. I've been trying for years to hold this together, hoping things would go back to what they were. But this is beyond repair. She said nothing. I'll be staying with a friend for now, I added. We'll talk about next steps later, divorce, separation, whatever. But I can't do this anymore. I won't be your punching bag. Not in public. Not in private. Still silence. She turned back to the window and sipped her coffee again, as if I were just another breeze passing through the room. But I wasn't a breeze. I was a man finally walking away from the storm. 2 weeks had passed since I left. I packed a small suitcase and stayed at a friend's guest room while I began sorting through the wreckage of my life. At first, it felt like free fall, no structure, no rhythm, just silence. But slowly, the silence began to feel like peace instead of punishment. I had blocked Emily's number, except for one email thread where we agreed to speak only through lawyers. There were no angry calls or tearful apologies from her. Just the same coldness, now behind a screen. The woman I once loved was gone. Maybe she had been for a long time. But through the dark, there was one person who kept showing up, Sophie. She messaged me the day after I left. Just to check in. Then again the next evening. Then one day, she asked if I wanted to grab a coffee, not out of pity, but companionship. I almost said no. I was still fragile. But something inside me wanted to feel human again. When I walked into the small cafe downtown, she was already there, her eyes lighting up when she saw me. She stood up and hugged me, not the kind of hug people give out of obligation. It was warm. Steady. Healing. We talked for over 2 hours. About everything. The marriage. The screenshots. The years I spent doubting myself. She listened the way people do when they genuinely care, not waiting to talk, but absorbing every word. And then, she opened up too. I stayed in a bad relationship for 3 years, she admitted. He didn't scream. He didn't hit. But he made me feel invisible. Like my opinions, my dreams, my kindness, they didn't matter. I thought I was too much. Or not enough. Depends on the day. I nodded, because I understood every word of that. She looked at me then, her voice softer. Seeing Emily treat you that way, it brought everything back. And I hated myself for not speaking up sooner. You did speak up, I told her. You were the only one who did. There was a pause. And then, as if the air itself had shifted, she said, you know, I don't think people are meant to feel small in love. That stayed with me. We started meeting more often. Not because either of us needed to be rescued, but because being around her didn't hurt. It healed. Slowly. Gently. Naturally. There was no rush. No pressure. Just shared understanding. Quiet laughter. And peace. So much peace. One night, as we walked together along the quiet riverfront, she reached out and held my hand. Not nervously. Not possessively. Just naturally. And I let her. Because after everything I had been through, her presence felt like the one door I hadn't dared to open. The one that wasn't closing, but inviting me in. It's strange how healing doesn't come all at once. It arrives in fragments, tiny, almost invisible pieces you don't even notice until one day, you wake up and realize you're breathing differently. Deeper. Easier. That's what it felt like. I had spent so long being cautious, walking on emotional eggshells, afraid of doing or saying the wrong thing. But with Sophie, there was no fear. I could speak freely, laugh loudly, even sit in silence without the tension of being judged or dismissed. It wasn't just about love. It was about freedom. One evening, a month after I moved out, I found myself walking past the same restaurant where it all fell apart. The memory hit hard, Emily's laughter at my expense, Sophie's voice saying, "Let's go outside," the weight I'd carried in my chest that night. But this time, I wasn't there to relive it. I was meeting Sophie. She arrived in a soft gray sweater and jeans, hair pulled back, smile calm and unforced. We walked inside, not to relive a memory, but to rewrite it. We sat at the same table. The staff had changed. The room felt different, or maybe I did. This time, I wasn't shrinking in my seat. I was present, grounded, open. Over dinner, Sophie shared stories about her new project. She had started volunteering at a local shelter, helping women rebuild their confidence. I admired her strength, her heart. She didn't just escape pain, she turned it into purpose. At one point, she looked at me and said, "You're smiling more. You seem lighter." I nodded, surprised at how true it felt. I think I'm starting to remember who I used to be. Or maybe discovering who I was meant to be. She reached across the table and took my hand. "You were never the problem. You were just with someone who made you forget your worth." That night, we walked home under the glow of the streetlights, her hand still in mine. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't afraid of being not enough. I was learning to believe I already was. Healing wasn't loud or dramatic. It came in quiet moments, warm coffee, evening walks, shared truths. It came through choosing peace over familiarity, through letting go of someone who once made me feel like a ghost in my own life. Sophie didn't save me. I saved myself. But she reminded me that love isn't supposed to break you, it's supposed to build you. Slowly, gently. And as I stood outside her door that night, saying goodbye, I realized something. I wasn't just walking away from a broken marriage. I was walking toward something better. Toward myself. Toward hope. Toward a love that finally felt like home. 75.